The sun was a merciless hammer over the Montana Territory, beating the dust of redemption's single street into a fine choking powder. It was a heat that baked the promises out of a man, leaving only the hard truth of the land. For the Callahan brothers, that truth was a sprawling, prosperous ranch, rich with water, but empty of life. It was a silence that had finally grown too loud to bear. Arthur, the eldest, carried the weight of their legacy in the set of his shoulders. Bo, a mountain of quiet strength, felt the emptiness in the fields he so lovingly tended. Flynn, with a rogue smile that rarely reached his eyes, deflected it with sharp jests. And Leo, the reader and thinker, saw it in the stark equation of 4 men and 1,000 acres of solitude. Their solution, arrived at over a winter of grim silence and cheap whiskey, was radical, desperate, and now imminent. An advertisement placed months ago in a San Francisco newspaper, a transaction of telegrams and bank drafts, a promise of 4 brides from a world away. They stood on the warped planks of the stagecoach office porch, 4 pillars of Western stoicism, waiting for a future they had purchased, sight unseen. The groan of axles preceded the coach, a 6-horse beast coated in the ochre dust of the plains. It lumbered to a halt, the horses heaving, their hides slick with sweat. The driver spat a stream of tobacco juice. "They're here, Callahan, all 4. The door swung open, a rectangle of shadow in the blinding glare. The first to emerge moved with a deliberate grace that seemed entirely out of place in this raw-boned town. Then another, and another, and a 4th, until they stood in a line, a silent and formidable quartet. A murmur rippled through the few onlookers. It wasn't just that they were from a distant shore. It was the startling, undeniable fact of their faces. They were sisters. Arthur felt the gazes of the entire town burn into his back. He had prepared for complications. Women who might take one look at the vast, unforgiving sky and demand the next coach back east. Women who might not adapt. Women who might be nothing like their descriptions. He had not, in any calculation, prepared for this. 4 sisters. A family, delivered to his doorstep like a crate of goods. He stepped forward, the dust crunching under his boots, his brothers flanking him in a silent, formidable line. The eldest sister met his gaze without flinching. Her expression was one of serene composure, a mask of dignity that revealed nothing and challenged everything. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden hush. "I am Arthur Callahan." He gestured to his brothers in turn. "This is Bo, Flynn, and Leo." The woman inclined her head slightly, a gesture of profound and formal respect. "I am Leanne. These are my sisters, Shu, Gia, and An." Her voice was clear, without tremor, though the journey must have been an ordeal beyond his imagining. It was a business transaction, he reminded himself, nothing more. But the sight of them, huddled together not in fear, but in a silent pact of mutual support, struck a chord of something deeper, something that complicated the simple arithmetic of his plan. Flynn, ever the one to break a silence, stepped forward with a half-smile. "Well, I'll be. A full house." The sister he addressed, Gia, pinned him with a look as sharp as a shard of glass, and his smile faltered. There was a fire in that one, a warning. Bo, ever gentle, simply nodded toward the wagon, his concern for their comfort overriding his shock. "We have the wagon ready. It's a long ride to the ranch." It was Leanne who answered, her eyes scanning the faces of all 4 brothers, a careful and unnervingly accurate assessment. "We are ready, Mr. Callahan." Her gaze lingered on Arthur, a silent acknowledgment that this arrangement, this strange and unprecedented beginning, rested between them. The journey to the Callahan ranch was a silent testament to the scale of their new world. The sisters sat in the back of the buckboard, watching the landscape unspool in an endless tapestry of sagebrush, rock, and a sky so vast it seemed to press down on the earth. To them, it must have looked like the edge of the world, a place where the familiar rules of existence had been erased and rewritten in a language of wind and dust. The brothers rode alongside, a mounted guard for their newly acquired family. Arthur rode at the head, his posture rigid, his mind racing. An arrangement for 4 separate women was one thing. A covenant with a family was another entirely. He felt the weight of 4 lives, 4 futures settling upon him, heavier than any mortgage or cattle drive. He had sought a wife to build a legacy, but he had inadvertently imported a dynasty. He glanced back at Leanne. She sat straight-backed, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable as she surveyed the land that was to be her home. She was not a timid bride. She was a queen surveying a new and wild kingdom. Flynn trotted his horse closer to the wagon, attempting to engage the fiery Gia again. "It's not much to look at right now," he offered, gesturing to the rugged terrain. "But it has a certain charm once you get used to it." Gia's eyes met his. "I do not require charm, Mr. Callahan. I require honesty." Flynn was taken aback, a rare occurrence. He tipped his hat. "Flynn, just Flynn. And you'll get honesty from me, Miss Gia, whether you like it or not." A flicker of something, perhaps respect, crossed her face before she turned away. Near the back, Beau's large, gentle presence seemed to offer a silent comfort to Shue, whose quiet demeanor suggested a sensitive spirit. He pointed to a hawk circling high above. "Redtail," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Good hunters. They keep the snakes down." Shue followed his gaze, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time. It was a simple offering, a piece of this new world given freely, and she accepted it. Leo, meanwhile, rode in quiet observation, his attention drawn to the youngest, Anne. She was the most withdrawn of the sisters, her gaze constantly scanning their surroundings, not with curiosity, but with a deep, ingrained vigilance. He saw a tremor in her hands she tried to hide, and recognized the echo of a fear he knew all too well. The Callahan homestead appeared first as a dark line on the horizon, slowly resolving into a collection of sturdy, unadorned buildings, a large ranch house, a formidable barn, and a web of corrals. It was a place built for work, not comfort, a fact that was starkly evident the moment the sisters stepped across the threshold. The air inside was thick with the scent of old wood, leather, and the lingering solitude of 4 bachelors. Dust motes danced in the shafts of late afternoon sun, illuminating worn floorboards and furniture built for function alone. There were no curtains on the windows, no softness to blunt the hard edges of the rooms. The brothers stood awkwardly in the center of the main room, suddenly seeing their home through the eyes of these women. What had been familiar and functional now seemed crude and unwelcoming. Leanne surveyed the space with the same calm appraisal she had given the landscape. She ran a hand over the dusty mantelpiece, leaving a clean streak. "It is a strong house," she said, her tone neutral. It was not a compliment, but a statement of fact, an assessment of the foundation upon which they were to build. In the days that followed, a quiet transformation began. The sisters moved through the house with a silent, synchronized efficiency that was both baffling and mesmerizing to the brothers. Without a word of complaint, they began to impose order on the chaos. Windows were washed until they gleamed, letting in a brighter, cleaner light. Floors were scrubbed, and the scent of soap and drying herbs began to replace the stale air. Shue, it turned out, had a gift for cooking. The brothers' monotonous diet of beef, beans, and hard biscuits was replaced by meals that were subtle, fragrant, and astonishingly delicious, coaxed from the same limited supplies they had always used. Gia, with her boundless energy, took to the neglected vegetable garden, attacking the weeds with a ferocity that made Flynn grin. He'd lean on the fence, offering unsolicited advice, just to watch her eyes flash with indignation. "You'll break your back that way," he'd drawl. "And you will break your neck if you do not move," she would retort without looking up. It was their strange courtship, a battle of wills fought over tomato vines and rows of corn. One afternoon, Leo found Anne in the small, neglected room that served as his library. She was holding one of his treasured books, a collection of poetry, tracing the letters on the cover with a delicate finger. She looked up, startled, as he entered, and made to put it back. "Please," he said softly, "it is for reading." She hesitated, then opened it, her expression softening as she scanned the pages. "Where I am from," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "books were a luxury for men." Leo felt a pang of anger at the injustice. He pulled another volume from the shelf, a book of botanical drawings. "This land has its own poetry," he said, opening it to a page showing a resilient prairie flower. "You just have to learn its language." They spent the rest of the hour in comfortable silence, turning pages, sharing a space of quiet discovery. Anne's vigilance seemed to ease in the stillness of the room, her shoulders losing some of their tension. But the peace of the ranch was a fragile thing. The name Jasper Thorne had begun to circulate with increasing frequency, a shadow creeping at the edges of their new life. He was a man who collected land the way other men collected stamps, using intimidation and violence to seize whatever he coveted. The Callahan Ranch, with its year-round creek, was the jewel of the valley, and Thorne wanted it. Arthur knew a confrontation was inevitable. He saw the worry reflected in Leanne's eyes as they stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun bleed across the horizon. "He will not stop," she said, her voice low. It wasn't a question. "No," Arthur admitted, his voice grim. "Men like that never do." He looked at her, at the strength in her profile, and felt a powerful, unfamiliar surge of protectiveness that went far beyond the bounds of their business arrangement. This was her home now. He would not let any man threaten it. The summer storm rolled in from the west without warning, a bruised purple mass that swallowed the sky. The wind rose to a demonic howl, rattling the window panes and stripping leaves from the cottonwood trees. Rain fell in solid, blinding sheets, turning the dusty yard into a churning sea of mud. Inside the ranch house, the sisters huddled together, the ferocity of the storm a terrifying echo of the typhoons they had known in their homeland. A particularly violent gust of wind forced the main door open with a deafening crack, sending a cascade of rain and debris into the room. In the ensuing chaos, as Bo and Arthur fought to bolt the door, a small silk-wrapped parcel fell from a pouch Anne was wearing, skittering across the floor. She cried out, a sound of pure panic, and scrambled for it, but Leo reached it first. As he handed it back to her, the silk covering fell away, revealing a single, intricately carved jade pendant. The sight of it seemed to break something inside her. A sob escaped her, then another, and the carefully constructed walls of her composure crumbled. Leo gently guided her away from the others into the relative quiet of his study. There, with the storm raging outside and her sisters casting worried glances, Anne finally told him their secret. They had not come to America simply for a better life. They had fled. Their father, a merchant with a weakness for gambling, had fallen into insurmountable debt to a ruthless triad leader in their province, a man known for his cruelty and possessiveness. When their father could not pay, the man had demanded one of his daughters as settlement. He had chosen Anne. Her sisters, led by the fiercely protective Leon, had refused. They had pooled every resource they had, sold every last heirloom, and paid for passage under assumed names, seeking refuge in the one place they thought he could never reach them. The jade pendant was the last piece of their mother's dowry, a final link to a life that was gone forever. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one that had just broken in Leo's heart. They were not just mail-order brides. They were refugees, hiding from a danger far more personal and sinister than land barons or the harshness of the frontier. The revelation changed everything. When Leo shared the truth with his brothers, the nature of their arrangement was irrevocably transformed. It was no longer a contract. It was a vow. The quiet protectiveness they had felt for the sisters hardened into a fierce, unyielding shield. Arthur looked at Leanne with new eyes, understanding now the source of her unbending strength and the constant weight of responsibility she carried. She was not just a capable partner. She was the guardian of her family's survival. Their late-night conversations on the porch shifted from ranch logistics to quiet confessions of hope and fear. "I will not let any harm come to them, Leanne," Arthur said one night, his voice a low, solemn promise. "I know," she replied, and the simple trust in her voice was more intimate than any touch. The soft romance that had been a tentative seedling began to grow in the newfound soil of shared purpose. Flynn's teasing of Gia lost its biting edge, replaced by a genuine admiration for her untamable spirit. He found her one afternoon, her hands raw from her work in the garden, and gently took them in his. "You fight the very earth you stand on," he murmured, his thumb stroking her palm. Gia looked up, her fiery gaze softened by surprise and something more. "Some things are worth fighting for," she whispered. The connection between Beau and Shue deepened in the quiet corners of ranch life. He would leave her small bouquets of wildflowers on the kitchen table, and she would save him the best cuts of meat from dinner. Theirs was a love that needed few words, a language of gentle gestures and shared glances that spoke volumes. For Leo and An, their bond was forged in the crucible of her secret. He became her anchor in a world she viewed with perpetual fear, his calm presence a balm to her anxious spirit. He read to her from his books, sharing worlds of poetry and history, slowly replacing her memories of terror with new ones of peace and safety. But the shadow of Jasper Thorne grew longer. He rode to the ranch himself one day, a man whose tailored suit looked obscene against the rustic landscape. He made Arthur a final, derisory offer for the land, his eyes lingering on the sisters with a cold, possessive gleam. "A man needs a strong legacy, Callahan," Thorne said, his voice smooth as oiled steel. "This land, these acquisitions, you can't protect them all." The threat was clear. When Arthur flatly refused, Thorne's smile was a chilling promise of violence. "You will regret this." Thorne was a man of his word. He did not wait long. A week later, as twilight bled purple and orange across the plains, they came. A dozen riders, their faces obscured by dust and grim purpose, materializing from the dusk like vengeful spirits. A warning shot from Flynn, perched in the hayloft, shattered the evening calm. The attack was sudden and brutal. Gunfire erupted, splintering the wood of the house and barn. The brothers, having anticipated such a move, were ready. They returned fire from fortified positions. Arthur from the porch, Beau from the stable, Leo from an upstairs window, and Flynn from his vantage point in the loft. The air grew thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the percussive roar of rifles. Inside, the sisters were a whirlwind of determined action. They were not screaming damsels. They were survivors. Under Leanne's calm direction, they barricaded the doors and windows with heavy furniture. Gia, her face set in a furious mask, reloaded rifles for Leo, her movements quick and precise. Shue, her gentle nature belying a core of steel, tore strips of linen for bandages, her hands steady despite the chaos. Anne, her own fears pushed aside, kept a lookout on the back of the house, her quiet voice calling out the movement of Thorne's men with startling clarity. A bullet grazed Beau's arm, and Shue was there in an instant, cleaning and binding the wound with a practiced efficiency that amazed him. He looked at her, his heart swelling with a love so fierce it eclipsed the pain. Flynn's rifle picked off riders who tried to get close to the barn, his usual charm replaced by a deadly focus. He was fighting for more than land now. He was fighting for the woman in the garden, the one who challenged him and made him feel more alive than he ever had before. The battle raged, a symphony of violence under the rising moon, a desperate defense of a home that had, in a few short weeks, come to mean everything. The initial assault was repelled. Thorne's men, having lost the element of surprise and taken casualties, retreated into the darkness, leaving behind a silence that was more unnerving than the noise of the battle. The brothers knew it was not over. Thorne was not a man to accept defeat. His next move would be more insidious. 2 days later, the county sheriff, a man known to be in Thorne's pocket, rode up to the ranch with 2 deputies and Thorne himself, who looked smug and untouched. The sheriff unrolled a parchment with a flourish. "Arthur Callahan," he announced, his voice oozing false authority. "I have here a deed of sale for this property, signed and dated 2 months ago, transferring ownership to Mr. Jasper Thorne. You and yours are trespassing." Arthur's face went pale with rage. "That's a lie. This is a forgery." Thorne simply smiled. "The law says otherwise. You have 24 hours to vacate." It was a checkmate, a legal trap from which there seemed no escape. But Thorne had underestimated his opponents. As Arthur prepared to argue, Leo stepped forward, a book in his hand. "Sheriff, may I see that document?" he asked calmly. Reluctantly, the sheriff handed it over. Leo examined it, his eyes scanning the text, then the signatures, then the official seal. He then turned to a map he had brought from the house. "Interesting," Leo murmured. "This deed uses the county survey markers established last year. Yet it claims to have been signed 2 months before that survey was completed and registered. The legal description it uses did not exist at the time it was supposedly written." He then pointed to a faint watermark on the paper. "And this paper comes from a mill that only opened in St. Louis last month." The sheriff's face began to lose its color. Leanne stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the 2 deputies. "Your sheriff is attempting to enforce a fraudulent document on behalf of a man who attacked this home and these people just 2 nights ago," she said, her voice ringing with clarity and conviction. "Is this the kind of law you swore to uphold? To serve a coward who sends men to do his killing and then hides behind forged papers?" The deputies shifted, avoiding Thorne's glare, their own sense of honor pricked by her direct, unshakable accusation. The strategic pincer of Leo's intellect and Leanne's moral authority had closed around Thorne and his puppet. The deputies exchanged a look. One of them, a younger man with a conscience not yet fully corroded, took a half step away from the sheriff. The conspiracy, so bold in its conception, crumbled under the weight of simple, irrefutable truth. Thorne, seeing the tide turn against him, let out a snarl of fury and lunged for Leo, but he was stopped short by Beau's massive hand clamping down on his shoulder. The fight went out of him instantly, replaced by the impotent rage of a bully who had finally met an immovable object. "Get off my land," Arthur said, his voice low and deadly. The disgraced sheriff, seeing his authority evaporate, mumbled something about a misunderstanding and practically ran for his horse. The deputies, after a moment's hesitation, followed, leaving Thorne alone and exposed. He glared at the 4 brothers and the 4 sisters standing united on the porch. "This isn't over," he spat. Flynn laughed, a sound devoid of any humor. "Oh, I think it is. I hear the federal marshal takes a dim view of land fraud and attempted murder. You'd best start riding, Thorne, and don't stop." With a final, hateful look, Thorne mounted his horse and galloped away, a defeated man swallowed by the vastness of the land he had tried to steal. A profound quiet descended upon the ranch, broken only by the sigh of the wind. The threat was gone. In the calm, golden light of the late afternoon, the reality of what they had accomplished settled over them. They had not just defended a piece of property, they had defended their family. That evening, the exhaustion gave way to a quiet, profound sense of peace. Arthur found Leanne by the corral watching the horses. He stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "The arrangement we made," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "it no longer seems adequate." Leanne turned to him, her eyes searching his. "What are you proposing, Arthur?" He took her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. "I'm proposing a marriage, Leanne, a real one, a partnership, a life." A slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. "I accept." Not far away, Flynn cornered Gia by the well. He had no clever words left. "I love you," he said, the 3 words feeling more honest than anything he'd ever said. Gia, for the first time, was speechless. She simply reached up and pulled his face down to hers, her kiss as fiery and wonderful as she was. Bo led Shue to a small rise overlooking the valley, the first stars beginning to prick the twilight sky. He presented her not with a ring, but with a small, perfectly formed river stone, smooth and warm from his pocket. "I'm not a man of many words, Shue," he rumbled, "but my heart is yours. Will you be my wife?" Her tearful, joyful nod was all the answer he needed, and in the lamp-lit quiet of the library, Leo sat within. He took her hand. "The man you fled from can never find you here. This is your home now. You are safe." He looked at her, his heart full. "I want to spend my life making sure you always feel that way." Ann's eyes, so often filled with fear, now shone with a light of pure, unadulterated hope. "I would like that," she whispered. Months melted into a season of quiet prosperity. The searing heat of that first summer gave way to the crisp gold of autumn. The Callahan Ranch was transformed. It was no longer just a place of work, but a home, filled with the low murmur of conversation and the scent of Shue's baking. The 4 marriages, born of desperation and forged in conflict, had settled into the comfortable rhythms of genuine love. Arthur and Leanne were the undisputed leaders, their partnership a blend of his steadfast strength and her keen intellect. They ran the ranch together, their shared decisions doubling its success. On the porch in the evenings, his arm would rest around her shoulders, a simple, proprietary gesture that spoke of a deep and abiding contentment. Flynn and Gia's fire had not been extinguished. It had simply been banked into a warm, passionate hearth. Their banter continued, but now it was laced with an undeniable affection. He would pull her into his arms in the middle of the garden, heedless of the dirt on her hands, and their laughter would carry on the breeze, a testament to a love that was as wild and vibrant as they were. Bo and Shue had built a world of gentle tranquility. He expanded the stables, his skill with horses becoming legendary in the territory, while she cultivated an herb garden that was the envy of the valley. Theirs was a silent, profound partnership, a love expressed in the shared work of their hands and the peaceful quiet of their evenings together. Leo and Ann's bond remained the most tender. In the safety of his love, Anne had blossomed. The vigilance in her eyes was replaced by a soft curiosity. She had become his research partner, her quick mind and steady hand invaluable in his study of the local flora. Their love was a sanctuary, a quiet space of healing and discovery, a promise fulfilled. One evening, all 8 of them gathered on the expanded porch to watch the sunset. The land that had once seemed so alien and intimidating to the sisters was now their own, its rugged contours as familiar as a lover's face. They were no longer 4 brothers and 4 brides. They were a family, a strange and wonderful dynasty built on a foundation of courage, loyalty, and a love that had defied all odds. The future, like the vast Montana sky above them, was limitless.